Hi, Vinod. It's nice to see you. Our Fireside chat guest is Vinod Ramachandran, who's a product manager at Google Cloud for BigQuery and BigLake. And prior to Google, Vinod worked in product development at Oracle. He has an MBA from the University of Chicago, a master's in computer science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a bachelor's from BITS, Pilani, India. So I think we're in good hands with Vinod to talk about this topic, and welcome. I'm happy that you're here.
Yeah. Hello, Fern. Thank you for having me here.
So let's get started. You heard what I spoke about. I spoke about the importance to organizations of data foundations, including the emergence of unstructured data and the semantic layer. I talked about agentic AI moving past single agents. I talked about AI governance, and particularly of agents, bringing in agents and how that's becoming important to govern. So what data and AI and governance trends do you see having the biggest impact on enterprises in mid 2026?
Yeah, your talk was great, and you touched a lot of key themes that I'm super excited about and very close to my heart. One thing that we see is like 90% of organizations, like they all have like an AI focus and like a strong investment in AI for the next 3 years. But one thing that we think about as they're thinking about data is, 70% of this data is still like there are challenges with data unification and governance, and organizations are figuring out how to grapple that. The other key piece that we see is that 80% of the data is like unstructured. So organizations are also trying to see how they can tap into this data and combine like structured and unstructured data to get the right level of insights and turn them into actions. And so that's where, like organizations have to work towards building governed solutions, use open formats, and then open standards to some extent to get them prepared to tap this data.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I'm curious because I've always been a fan of unstructured data. For instance, I remember being at Bell Labs and trying to predict customers who would disconnect, and I knew that the answers were in those call center notes. So, for example, so do you see your clients actually trying to solve problems like that? You know, with their unstructured data. I know that some structured text a big area that organizations were interested in, but are they actually being able to build applications like this?
Yes, yeah. So organizations, the way I see unstructured data is it's multimodal, right? So data that's stored in images like text, transcriptions, or audio files, and so on. And what organizations are really looking at is how do I tap this data, to some extent dark data, to get the deep insights at scale, right? And so with the evolution of AI and agentic capabilities as well, now organizations can actually build systems that can actually run an AI function on an unstructured data, like like an image, and then basically like get the insight. For example, think about like a retail company that's trying to look at returns and trying to analyze patterns, but they actually want to learn more about how these products are, what is the profile of these products to some extent. In some cases, they're just order IDs and then like an image. And so now a lot of this is like curated in an object store. And now with the evolution of AI, they can actually like scan this data, query it, convert it into some form of queryable way, and then actually learn more about the product, and then like tweak their retail campaigns accordingly to kind of prevent returns and so on. And so
Mhm.
there's definitely a lot of value in this. And then I think it's just like if you can tap this data, it can create significant business value for users and customers.
Right. And I'd imagine, though, you know, as organizations are starting to try to build agents, as I mentioned, you know, we're seeing a lot of single agents, but there's multi agents. Multi agent systems can provide a lot of value. You know, those agents, some of the agents are going to be interacting with structured data. Some may be interacting, you know, with unstructured data. They're going to have to scale. There's going to be, you know, high volume of this data and agents sort of acting in real time.
Mhm.
So, you know, what we typically see at TDWI is that not all pilots make it to production, which is fine. I mentioned that in my talk. You know, organizations are going to want to work with see where they fail, learn fast, whatever. But what do you actually see separates organizations that are successfully operationalizing agentic AI from those that are still struggling to move beyond pilots?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and I think something like organizations are actively thinking about, especially for customers and organizations that I've seen success with. They start from the ground up and take a holistic approach, like right from the data layer, where they design a data lake based on open standards. So the storage layer, then at the catalog layer, they build it on open standards and foundations, and also like enrich it to the right level of context, because agents tend to hallucinate. So you need the right level of context to get the value from like the agentic system or architecture you're building. And then the open standards, right? Building agents around MCP and open protocols like A2A, and then specialized agents so that you can basically have one agent hand off to another agent so that you get the value in your work stream. So like a concrete use case, think about an inventory management use case. You like have an agent that's making sure it can track the stock outs in your inventory system, but then orders it, hands it over when it identifies a problem to a secondary agent that does the replenishment. And you can see that organizations then get a significant boost in the output they get in cutting down the stock out rate. So organizations that take a holistic and thoughtful approach and designing these architectures both from the data side as well as building agents the right level of context and open standards tend to succeed. And then I think the last piece is bias for action, basically starting early in the journey itself, so that like if it's a year from now that you're going to production, you start early and then iterate with an agile manner to land it.
Yeah, you touched on a number of things that are actually in our Q2 blueprint, which has just come out. It talks about the data it talks mostly about the data foundation, but in terms of, the context and the open file, file formats, etc. That when we see organizations that are successful measuring ROI, they're actually, they're being very intentional about what they're doing. And, in the past 2 years ago, it just seemed like a lot of organizations were skipping over some of the fundamentals to do something with AI. But I think 2026 is a year where organizations have to look at the fundamentals and the foundations and the semantics and the ontologies and the taxonomies, and they're thinking more about knowledge graphs so that their agents actually understand the context of the environment that they're operating in. As I mentioned, we don't necessarily see a whole bunch of organizations deploying multi-agent systems. So I'm curious about how much real world multi-agent systems are you seeing today? Because we're seeing maybe 20% of respondents to our surveys actually deploying multi-agent systems. And where are they delivering measurable business value? We hear early use cases like supply chain and, around procurement and supply chain and that sort of thing. But where are you seeing it at Google Cloud?
Yeah, that's a good question. So of course, many customers are actively exploring agents, and agents is top of mind. And AI has definitely evolved from, like a chat-based interface to building these agentic architectures. So anywhere you have a workflow or kind of like with different workflow steps, agents definitely play a big part. And this could be in retail, it could be in supply chain, or it could be in any other industry. So everywhere where you have workflow problems or problems where it's like one system handing off to the other system, that's where agents play like a big part in improving the business value. Like if it's inventory management, it's like cutting the stock out rate. In retail, it could be minimizing the return rate, or or if it's a CRM campaign, where you can combine clickstream data with, say, the CRM campaign data. You can do analysis to understand like how the campaign's doing. So you can have an agent that's specialized on the clickstream analysis, and then you can have another agent that's looking at the CRM campaign, and it hands off that. So anywhere you have workflows, those kind of patterns or design patterns, multi-agent architectures do reasonably well and also give you the right business outcomes. So that's been the trend that like we have seen at Google, and a lot of customers are actually exploring this because like now they're able to tap a lot of this data and also have the agent like turn this from human scale to agent scale. And so that's where I think the business value comes in.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because some of the companies that I talk to, they don't necessarily they know that they want to automate with agents sort of a workflow process, but they may not have documented or understand sort of how their workflow functions in the first place. So they're sort of going back, a light bulb went off, and they're going back and actually sort of laying out some of those workflows, because I would imagine that with agentic AI, as you build these things, you sort of have to, really control them to make sure that errors don't cascade, etc. So I'm also wondering, are your clients thinking about sort of the governance angle
Yes.
of
Yeah.
all of this?
Governance is a very key part of this puzzle. And so having agents with trusted context is probably very imperative. So like, for example, at Google, we have uh, agents that are built with the help of our knowledge catalog, like accessing context from our knowledge catalog, which is trusted, uh, with data across disparate sources, both structured and unstructured, as well as data that's cross cloud. So what this enables users to do is like, hey, I have my data lake with all this data foundation, and then I generate rich context. So with that trusted context provided to the agent, it kind of helps like cut down hallucination, and then basically helps the agent like take the right set of measures needed, so which is the agent scale part, but the right set of context makes it really valuable. And I think that's very key. So having trusted agents is probably very important, so that like you don't have errors, as you mentioned, which could lead to the wrong outcomes.
Right. I mean, it seems like, when you were designing systems, you were,
Mhm.
from an auditing perspective, you were concerned about the inputs and the output controls and the controls sort of in the system. Now you sort of have that magnified, where you're going to have to think about the controls into the agent, out of the
Correct.
agent, between the agents, so really sort of mapping out how agents could possibly talk to each other in a systems sort of way as you build these multi-agent systems. And of course, you have the orchestrator, as part of that. Seems like it's going to be key, I think,
It's
for
key. Yeah, like
organizations.
yeah. Key is like what is the level of access to data provided, what like security models are used, what open standards are used to for the agents to interact, and what is the data layout itself, like how is it laid out, and then what formats are used for it. All of that is key. And then how is the context generated is also a key part of like designing the entire architecture. And I think that's where, if I were to say, success looks like the customers who start early, and design this from the ground up with all of this, they like really succeed, because then they're able to then have these agents exposed to their organizations, to users who are probably just wanting to talk to the data or have a conversation. And under the hood, the agent's doing a bunch of things to solve the problem for them, but they can then do it with the right level of confidence and trust. Okay, so this system is blessed by our security team, or and so on and so forth, so we can ask it the right set of questions to get the answers we need.
One last question. Do you think that organizations are sort of underestimating that today, or do you see them, if you had to pick an area that organizations are underestimating, that will come back to bite them in the next 12 to 18 months, is it that's, or is it something else?
So I think what I would say is, like, if you're on the fence on not starting an agentic architecture, I would say definitely start early and take action, because I think there's a lot of value that you can get once you set the foundations right. And I think that would be the one thing that I would encourage organizations and customers to think about, because once you get the architecture right, the business value is significant.